to get the word out to all of us in TB, what's happening and what can we do. And that's the purpose of today's call, which is really to give a broad overview of what's happening and what's being done and what can we do to make sure that every one of our patients have the drugs that we need for TB, because I think one of the things that I always say that makes me most happy about being in TB, that we're all in together, we're all partners, and it's the TB world that we all deal with, and we're always trying to help each other to make sure that we do the best. And as you guys know, this is a little bizarre for us because, TB has been around for a long time. As you know, it's been always the leading cause of death, one of the leading causes of death of man. And we've been really, really lucky over the last 50 years thanks to medications that have really made this once deadly disease something that could be controlled. And we've become dependent on our meds. We really, for the most part, don't really think much about meds, not nearly as much as we should. As you know, the shortage and the trouble of being able to get TB meds has been a problem worldwide, but in the United States, we've become accustomed to always having them around. In some ways, we've been a little spoiled. As you know, these TB meds have been around for 50 years. In the United States, they're relatively cheap, and they don't get the same attention. I don't know about you guys, but this Sunday I was watching something, maybe a couple of you saw, the Super Bowl, and I didn't see any TB commercials. I didn't see, any, drug commercials because, as we know, these drugs traditionally have been relatively cheap and really not much, pomp and circumstances have been given to us. But as you know, things have really changed. About approximately 3 years ago, we started seeing some decreases in some of our injectable antibiotics, particularly amikacin. And this, TB is not alone. We saw this not only with tuberculosis, but other antibiotics, other chemotherapeutic agents, to the point that President Obama actually put out an executive order saying that the FDA should really be following these drug shortages and making sure that trying to account for what's happening. And that was bad enough, but luckily amikacin, for the most part, we were only using for our MDR. But really, things really turned, us all of our heads around when in November, a group of, of many of us who deal with TB started noticing that our orders for INH started to become on back order. And we were starting to be told that INH shortages were beginning. And that really started to turn all of us to start thinking about what were we going to do, because we potentially, the thought of not having INH, probably, if not our best, one of our best drugs against TB, the drug we really rely on for our latent tuberculosis infection treatment, as well as our active TB disease treatment, what would we do without INH shortage? And it really has brought a lot of concern within the TB community. And I have to say, I'm so proud of the responses and what we've been doing to make sure that every one of our patients have the drugs we need. But I also think something else is important that I'd like to talk about today, and I think we will talk about today, is that while we're going to focus on the TB shortage, in some ways this whole situation has made us really evaluate how we use INH and what we could do to try to preserve it. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn us over to today's, topic, today's grand rounds, because what it really is going to be about is all different perspectives of the INH shortage. We've been lucky enough, and I have to say I want to publicly right now put out an amazing thanks to our speakers who at very, very short notice agreed to get together to bring you the latest news and what are the latest recommendations concerning the INH shortage. We have representatives, as you'll hear, and experts from the CDC, the pharmaceutical industry, advocacy groups, and most importantly, our brothers in the TB programs to talk about and look at what are some of the aspects of this issue, as well as what can we do to assure that our patients will never want for INH and that they'll always have it. So with that, I'd like to really turn it over to Sundari Mase, but I'd like to say that this is about all of us. It's not one way. This is not going to just be the speakers getting to you. We will leave plenty of time at the end so that we can answer your questions to make sure you know what you can do to make sure we can ensure that our patients have the drugs they need. So first, I'd like to really have the honor to introduce Sundari Mase. Sundari, as you all know, is the medical team lead in the Field Services Evaluation Branch of the CDC's TB Division of Elimination. And what she's going to be talking about is shortage of TB drugs used for the treatment of TB and how do we secure an adequate drug supply for each of our TB patients. Sundari, I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dave. Donna, I'm not seeing my slides.
Well, while Sundari is looking for her slides, I just want to remind you guys also is that one of the cool features of this is that you can actually be chatting with other people on the program. So if you guys at any time want to chat with any of us, you want to chat with each other, please go ahead. You see it on your bottom right. Sundari, do you see your slides now?
I am looking to see if I can find them. Actually, I'm not seeing them at all. Although I am logged in here. 1 second.
All right. Well, let's
see. I'm actually not seeing the slides. Oh, here we go. Now I've got them. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
It's all yours.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody, and good afternoon. Thanks for participating in this very important conference on drug shortages. Donna, how would I advance my slides? Oh, here we go. Are they advanced? Yes. All right, everybody, please remain muted, and let me get started. Donna and Dave, can you hear me?
We most certainly can, Sundari.
Okay, great. All right, so what I'd like to do over the course of the next 15 to 20 minutes is sort of give some background on drug shortages and why we're seeing shortages in TB drugs specifically, and speak to some potential solutions that we might have and new approaches. So first of all, I want to present Component 1 of the WHO Stop TB strategy, pursuing high-quality DOTS expansion and enhancement. Element 4 mandates an effective drug supply and management system. So this requires an uninterrupted and sustained supply of anti-TB drugs, which are fundamental for TB control programs and TB control. And this includes having a reliable system of procurement and distribution of anti-TB drugs that should be in place, and that anti-TB drugs should be available free of charge for our patients who are in need. And lastly, it refers to legislation that should be in place for drug regulation to ensure that our patients get drugs on time, safe, quality drugs. I also want to point out that the international standards for TB control program also mandates an uninterrupted supply of good quality anti-TB drugs, and that the hang on, I think my slides just went out again. Donna? Let's see.
I think Sundari they're going to have it for you. Just we apologize for the delay.
Oh, here we go. Okay, got it. Sorry about that. Okay, so the Advisory Committee for the Elimination of Tuberculosis has also mandated that our patients who have TB receive appropriate treatment until they're cured, and that patients be treated without consideration of their ability to pay. And Dave mentioned the 2011 President's Executive Order, and I want to highlight that the executive order directs FDA and Department of Justice to broaden reporting of manufacturing discontinuations, to expedite FDA regulatory review if it helps avoid shortages, and to report to the Department of Justice if FDA finds price gouging or illegal stockpiling. So why are we discussing this issue in 2013? Well, I think all of you on the line would agree that TB patients and U.S. TB control programs have been experiencing recurring difficulties accessing, we thought initially, mainly second-line drugs, but as of recently, as everyone's aware, first-line drugs as well. And the issues that contribute to difficulty accessing drugs are many, including drug shortages, climbing costs, the multi-step processes for procurement of certain drugs, drugs being out of reach in terms of expense for uncovered patients, and stress on programs. However, today we will be focusing on drug shortages. So I want to refer everybody to the MMWR that was published January 18th of this year that highlights the interruptions in supplies of second-line anti-TB drugs and refers to the NTCA survey that was performed 2 years ago, which I will present. Most of my slides from here on out are covered in this MMWR. So the number of drug shortages generally, not exclusive to TB drugs, but generally tripled between 2005 and 2010. The majority of these drug shortages have occurred in our sterile injectable agents. The most common types of drugs that have been in shortage are oncology drugs, antibiotics, electrolyte, and nutritional drugs. So the reason, why do we have these drug shortages? What are the reasons? Well, the most common are problems with the manufacturing facility and quality of drug products, including finding glass shards, metal filings, and other substances that contaminate drug supply, especially in the sterile injectable agents. Delays in manufacturing contribute. Active pharmaceutical ingredient shortages have occurred, and that's actually what's mainly contributed to our INH shortage, and increasing demand outpacing supply. And as we know, when one drug is in shortage, when we reach for another to replace it, then that drug is also put at risk and can be in shortage. Other challenges that contribute to shortages include passive reporting of shortages when they occur and not in a timely fashion, manufacturing issues that we discussed, the gray market, short-dated medications, sole source manufacturing of drugs, referring to only one pharmaceutical company producing a drug, so that when there's a shortage, there's no backup, and the lengthy procurement process for certain drugs like clofazimine. So specific to anti-TB drugs, we've been seeing problems with short dating that results in medications being difficult for pharmacies to keep, to obtain and keep, increased cost, clearly, that are larger, some drugs larger than many TB programs' budgets, or they're not covered for patients who are uninsured. And I mentioned the gray market suppliers, and that's when a drug is in shortage and suppliers hike up the cost of the drug in the gray market, and it becomes out of reach for our patients, and sole source manufacturing. So what are the results of drug shortages in the care of patients? Well, there can be adverse events clearly associated with switching to other drugs, medication errors that are made as drugs that are not commonly used are used, adverse consequences because the best treatment regimen is no longer usable, delays in treatment or procedures, the need to use a less effective drug in place of one that is highly effective, rationing or restricting drugs, increased costs we discussed, and of course staff time, which many of you on this line are well aware of. So the effect is felt by the patient, by programs and providers. TB programs lose credibility and can't meet their core functions. Clearly, the patient is at risk for worsening disease, acquisition of further drug resistance, and transmission of TB in our communities. In a nutshell, TB is not controlled. So here's just a few of the challenges we've been having. We've had trouble with all the injectables in the past few years. Kanamycin, there's no U.S. manufacturer for. Streptomycin has been in shortage at different times in the last few years. Amikacin, there was a material shortage for production. Caprimycin has a sole source manufacturer, and the price has been increased in the past few years to 10 times what it used to be. Cycloserine also has a sole source manufacturer. And we've had some shortages in the last several years of ethionamide. And as I point out here, the clofazimine requires a very lengthy procurement process. So in conclusion, shortages in MDRTB and in first-line TB medications have been experienced by many TB programs throughout the nation, and they have adverse consequences, and lots of resources and staff time go into solving these problems. So I'd like to quickly present the National TB Controller Association survey that was performed in the end of 2010. NTCA decided to take this on because of the many reports of drug shortages and difficulty in procuring TB medications that our TB programs have been reporting. And to better assess if there really was a national program, at this time we were focusing primarily on second-line drugs. The eligibility criteria to participate in the survey were that designated to a TB controller at any level of program, state, local, or county, had to be registered members of the NTCA at the time of the survey, and have an email address. The survey was performed through SurveyMonkey, distributed by email, and analyzed through SurveyMonkey software. The results showed that, first of all, 54% of programs that were queried responded. 33 of 61 programs that had functioning email addresses. And of the of these 33 that responded, 29 represented state TB programs and 4 represented large cities. 26, or 79% of those responding, reported having had an MDRTB case in that 5-year period of 2005 to 2010. Of these 26, 21 stated that their program had faced challenges obtaining MDRTB medications, citing mainly reasons such as a nationwide shortage for 100%. As you can see, 15 out of 21 programs noted shipping delays. At least half of the programs stated medications were too expensive, and 10 out of 21, or 48%, stated that there were delays caused by the IND or process for obtaining clofazimine. Now, of those 21 programs, 19 noted adverse effects due to these challenges. Delays in starting treatment in 58%, treatment lapse or interruption at the patient level in 32%, inadequate regimens for 32%, and substantial staff time tied up with procurement in 68%. So, as you can see, the majority of these programs provide some direct or consultative care and oversight for the care of MDRTB patients. The limitations of the survey are the poor response rate of only approximately 50%, a biased sample as a result potentially, and it may not have been representative of all programs in the U.S., but the data showed that we had low, medium, and high incidence jurisdictions involved with the survey. And the majority of MDR patients were reported by only a few states. So what is it then that we are doing to tackle the problem of drug shortages for TB? Well, the Advisory Committee for the Elimination of TB Advisory Group for MDR-TB was formed, and the working group was established in 2010 and has been very active with the issue of drug shortages. A problem statement was put out, which you can read, has been circulated to all members of NTCA. And specifically, what can the Division of TB Elimination do? As you know, we consult with TB programs when shortages are identified. Our program consultants here in the Field Services and Evaluation Branch have been very, very involved with the TB programs to try to respond to reports of drug shortages. We provide evidence of the impact of drug shortages and drug costs, collaborate with FDA to reduce the impact of shortages, share information about drug availability with programs through the FDA website as well as ongoing communications. There is a thought of stockpiling drugs, even at a central level. And an exciting new development is that soon CDC will be the principal investigator for the IND for clofazimine, so that state and local programs will not need to apply separately on their own for a single patient IND, but rather use a CDC central IND to get the drug quickly for their patients. So potential solutions, very specific solutions, are regulatory requirements for early notification to FDA, and this has actually already happened. Legislation recently has been in place to make these drug shortages reportable. And early notification, to add these TB drugs to the medically necessary list. And I wanted to point out here, too, that not just medically necessary, but to even raise the bar higher and state that these drugs are absolutely necessary for the public's health, the overall health of the community, to decrease transmission of a very important infectious disease. To have potentially a national or regional MDR-TB repository or stockpile. These are things that we are looking into. Register second-line drugs with the Federal Orphan Program, providing incentives for manufacturers who are willing to produce them. Potentially pursue additional insurance coverage for second-line drugs. Streamline the process for investigational drug use, as with clofazimine. And most recently, CDC has been working with the Global Drug Facility to look at potential long-term solutions for being able to obtain drugs from overseas manufacturers when TB drugs are in shortage here with U.S. manufacturers. We're working closely with the FDA and with the Global Drug Facility to pursue this more creative solution and possibly long-term solution. So progress is being made. I point to the following bullets: President's executive order, legislation that's recently been put in place, and the FDA works with manufacturers and prevents many drug shortages every year. 38 in 2010, 195 in 2011, 150 as of November 2012, and that number would be significantly higher for at the end of 2012. So again, just to highlight, many TB drugs, both first and second line drugs, have been in shortage in the past several years. INH is the most important and shortage this time that we will be focusing quite a bit of our time in this webinar to. I want to direct everybody to the FDA drug shortage website, which is maintained and updated on a regular basis. And we'll have our next speakers speaking specifically on the Isoniazid shortage. And I refer people to the notes from the field that was put out in December by CDC on this issue. I'd like to acknowledge Jenny Flood, Neha Shaw, and our ASET Drug Shortage Work Group for my presentation, and I'll turn this over now to Dave Ashkin to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Sundari, thank you so much. And as Sundari pointed out, we're going to open up in a little while for questions and stuff, but first we really want to go over the actual specifics of the INH shortage. Our next speaker is John Warkentin. You guys know him as the president of our National TB Controls Association. He's also the Tennessee State TB Control Officer. And he's going to be talking about the impact of first-line drug shortage on domestic TB control and prevention programs. So, John, it's all yours. How's your hair doing?
I'm doing fine, Dave. Thanks so much. So this is John Warkentin in Nashville, Tennessee. And first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Ashkin and the SNTC for the invitation to participate today and provide a perspective from the National TB Controllers Association, and also just for hosting a national forum on this very important and timely issue that we are all engaged in. I would like to begin describing, first of all, a little bit of the context in which the current INH shortage exists. So bear with me as I review just a little bit. There may be some on the line today who are not clinicians, who may not be very familiar with the kinds of medication we're talking about and what we use them for. So bear with me for a moment, if you will. On the second slide here, we're looking at a list of the first-line anti-tuberculosis medications, and you see them listed as Isoniazid, rifampin, pyrazinamide, and Ethambutol. We use the acronyms that you see on the right, and then when we actually list in detail the regimens that we use for treating tuberculosis, we use the initials H, R, Z, and E. All four of these medications have been widely used. They are the standard of care for what we call pan-sensitive TB disease in the United States. They are critical to initiation of TB therapy for our cases and suspects here in the United States. We have two phases of treatment generally. If the strain of Mycobacterium tuberculosis is not resistant to either isoniazid or rifampin, we start with all four of those drugs in the initiation phase, which lasts for 8 weeks. And then depending on the sensitivity and so on, we continue with just two of those drugs, but those happen to be isoniazid and rifampin. So as you can see, in the treatment of TB disease in the United States, the cornerstone of our treatment happens to be Isoniazid, the drug which is in shortage currently. It is also the cornerstone of our treatment for latent TB infection, or as we try to move away from that acronym and look at the spectrum of disease associated with TB infection with tuberculosis. On the next slide, we're looking at the treatment of TB infection. Please note that as long as we don't have an effective TB vaccine, the treatment of TB infection is actually secondary prevention for individuals who happen to be infected with Mycobacterium tuberculosis. But in lieu of having a vaccine against TB, treatment of TB infection is primary prevention for populations. Currently, it is the only tool that we have, and we know that it works. So we have to treat people with TB infection to move forward with our mission. And as you all know, treatment of TB infection is not a luxury. It is actually essential to achieving our national goal of TB elimination in the United States. So if we have to prioritize treating of only suspects in TB, confirmed TB cases with Isoniazid or any other drugs, and give treatment of infection with tuberculosis a back seat, we are actually delaying or stopping our forward advance toward elimination of tuberculosis in the United States. We absolutely do not want to, and we cannot afford to lose ground to TB in our country. A reminder, too, that all TB is local. You've heard the adage, I'm sure, that all politics is local. That's where this expression comes from. But in our business of TB control and prevention, we know that public health across the country is not is not organized in the same manner across the country. It is actually mandated by state statutes and is not federally mandated. As a result of that, we have a very wide spectrum of TB program organization, and you see here kind of a simple description of centralized, decentralized, and hybrid models, but they vary quite widely among all 50 states, the territories, and large cities. So if you've seen one TB program, you've seen exactly one TB program. And medical care in these different jurisdictions can be provided in the public sector or by private providers, and then there are all kinds of different models. So what you see here is across the country, one size does not fit all TB programs or every public health jurisdiction. And so, as a result of that, the shortage of Isoniazid or any other TB-related medication is going to be somewhat different from one jurisdiction to another, and likewise the response may be different as well. On the next slide, you'll see the quite variable mix of funding sources for TB programs across the country. Along the left side, you see federal, state, local, third-party payers, hospitals, and patients who dig into their savings many times, provide cash, and in our state sometimes we see patients taken to collection agencies when they can't meet a copay or have no resources whatsoever. And if you have not, as a TB program staff person, experienced a passing of the hat for a TB patient, you've likely not been in the business very long. But we know that across the country, our TB programs have quite variable mixes of support for the crucial activities that we engage in. I'd like to particularly highlight here that among the states, there are some states which provide up to 80% of their TB program costs through state funding. However, there are other states which do not invest anything in terms of state funds for TB control and prevention in their jurisdictions. So what is the impact of the first-line drug shortages currently? This is a very important issue that's facing all of us today. And some of us became aware of the issue only in early December and more acutely so later in December. And the question became, how are the current shortages impacting TB programs across the country? We were aware of Isoniazid, but then there was a flyer that was distributed rather widely about an impending shortage of Ethambutol, which we may hear about a little bit later. Who all is affected by these shortages? You think of, obviously, TB programs, but our patients themselves. Their regimens may be changed as a result of shortages of first-line drugs. Obviously, pharmacies, which tend to have some supply of the medications on hand, and those pharmacies may be in the private sector on a corner near you. They may be in a hospital. They may be in a health department. There are clinics, private practices, and hospitals that are affected. And obviously, one of the largest areas of concern that we have currently is in corrections, where tuberculosis is easily transmitted, and hopefully, in areas where TB programs have been very proactive, there is an active screening and treatment program for TB infection. And I would just point out at this stage, before we move forward, that the NTCA Corrections Committee has done some outstanding work on a very short time frame to put out some guidance that is available to state correctional systems as well as to jails. And for further information about that 2-page information sheet, please contact the NTCA office. So finally, what we determined among the officers and members of the NTCA Executive Committee is that there was a very urgent need to assess the impact and address the first-line drug shortages. And we became even more aware of the dearth of information when we invited our CDC partners to our board conference call in early January. So at that point, we decided that we would do a quick survey, not a comprehensive survey, but a very quick online survey of all of the 50-state TB programs as well as the territories and each of the large cities which have a separate cooperative agreement with the CDC. So in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to discuss very briefly some of the major findings of that survey. And bear in mind that the findings I'm going to present to you were valid on January the 18th, and obviously several weeks have passed since that time. So on this current slide, you see a map of the United States and a brief orientation to it. You see the states are color-coded by their TB case rate in 2011, the last year for which we have complete data. And at least on my screen, it's orange and blue represent the states which had TB case rates above the national average of that year, which was 3.4 cases per 100,000. And then the green and the white were those states or jurisdictions with case rates under the national average. The point of this slide is that you see across the country, the stars, the black stars show where there was an INH, a difficulty in accessing INH only that was cross-country. It was from coast to coast, from top to bottom. And the reddish-colored stars indicate jurisdictions that had difficulty obtaining both INH and Ethambutol. So that was also a coast-to-coast issue already on January 18th of this year. If we move then to the next slide, we look at some other preliminary results. Of the 69 states and large cities and territories who were sent the survey, which was through SurveyMonkey, we received responses from just a little over 50% by that date. And you see that we had several large cities, San Francisco, San Diego, and New York City, which responded, and then we had 32 states as well, which we were very pleased with. And these covered a variety of morbidity levels, from less than 50 to 50 to 100, and then some jurisdictions over 100 cases in 2011. So here you look at what the variety of experience has been with the INH and EMB supply and procurement issues. In the top section, you see that there was difficulty obtaining INH in the previous month by 85% of the 34 respondents to that particular question. But also Ethambutol, 30% of the 33 respondents to that question were also having difficulty obtaining EMB during that time period. Some folks were trying to locate supplies of 100 milligram preparations of INH to substitute for situations when they normally would have used the 300 milligram tablets. There have been a host of different approaches to trying to obtain Isoniazid. This represents just two of the approaches. Obviously, most TB program managers have tried to work with their neighbors, whether it's neighboring counties or states, to obtain a supply as a stopgap measure. Others have resorted to importing or compounding pharmacies, which, as we all know, in the recent outbreak of fungal meningitis and so on, compounding pharmacies are not necessarily the solution to all of our issues. We also tried to ascertain when folks expected to receive an adequate supply of INH. And at the time of our survey, 4 out of 32 indicated they did not have INH at that time. Many others, if not most, expected to actually run out of INH within a couple of weeks. And today we will attempt to in a quick and dirty manner, rather, we will try to ascertain among you participants which of these situations you may be in. So what is the effect of the INH shortage on treatment of active TB disease and TB infection? At the time of these results, which was January 18th, and I apologize that there's a formatting issue here, but you see that some programs chose to change to a more expensive regimen, 29%. Let me flip to my own copy here because this is kind of slipped down here. Changing to a more expensive regimen for the treatment of TB disease was occasionally done. Typically that would have involved substituting for INH one of the fluoroquinolones like moxifloxacin or levofloxacin. And there was a variety of a wide range of the number of patients who were changed with their regimens. How did the INH shortage up to that point affect treatment of TB infection? Well, changing regimens was very, very common. 95% of the 21 jurisdictions answering that question indicated they had changed to an alternate regimen. And as you know, we have a couple of options there, primarily changing to rifampin daily for 4 months, also going to an intermittent regimen with INH, but still the 3-HP regimen that some of us are familiar with now still calls for 900 milligrams of isoniazid plus 900 milligrams of rifapentine plus B6 on a weekly basis times 12 weeks. So that still is reliant upon an adequate supply of isoniazid. So in summary, as we move to the next slide, you will see that our respondents to this quick and dirty survey conducted in early to mid-January included representation of over half of the nation's TB morbidity at that time, and over 85% of those respondents had some difficulty already obtaining isoniazid. This was affecting high, medium, and low morbidity programs in 23 states across the country, and at that time already 13% of our respondents had no INH in their stock. Nearly half expected to be out of INH within just 1 month, and today we are wondering how that situation has actually changed. Less than half were able to obtain a different formulation, that is the 100 milligram tablets. So otherwise, speaking of the impact, based on this survey, we see delays in treatment with more costly regimens, which is a double whammy for TB, publicly funded TB programs, which have limited resources to purchase new medications. We have seen treatment with alternative regimens that may have more drug interactions, speaking specifically of rifampin there, more toxicity, and possibly may be less effective. The shortage has also affected patients with infection as well as the patients with TB disease. And we know, all of you on the phone right now know, that TB program staff across the country have been literally scrambling to secure adequate supplies of these medications, which have been historically inexpensive, but obviously are critically needed. So there are a few developing issues. You will hear in a little bit about our partnership with Teva in terms of providing some emergency shipments of isoniazid on a prioritized basis to programs which have run out of INH for their cases and suspects. We do know that there is a possibility of a significant cost increase from another source of isoniazid, but we have not been able to obtain confirmation of that yet, nor rationale for such an increase. We are wondering, when I say we, I'm talking about our partners at CDC and Division of TB Elimination, as well as with NTCA and others, are there looming shortages of rifampin? If we lose if we can no longer respond by increasing the supply of isoniazid and turn increasingly toward rifampin for treatment of patients with TB infection, will our supply of rifampin go low? And where do we stand with ethambutol at this point? We see that there are long-term solutions needed towards stabilizing the national supply of first-line drugs, but that remains quite unclear at this point. We believe that the isoniazid shortage is evolving daily, and each of you also is aware of what's happening in your own jurisdiction. We need to find out where we stand so that any responses to it, any interventions, will be based on the most current data. To do that, we need a national assessment mechanism to, in a very timely way, track what our TB program needs are, where the gaps are, and what our current supplies are. And finally, quite obviously, we need a coordinated national response, but as I was alluding to earlier, one size does not fit all. Our jurisdictions are different, our governance is different, and we follow different regulations in terms of how we make purchases and do distribution of our medications. So, in the next couple of minutes, we're going to very quickly invite your participation on some questions. And Donna or our moderator, do you have any instructions on how to our participants will answer these questions?
Certainly. Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to register for a question, please press the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone. You will hear a three-tone prompt to acknowledge your request. If your question has been answered and you'd like to withdraw your registration, please press the 1 followed by the 3. If you're using a speakerphone, please lift up your handset before entering your request. As a reminder, to register for a question, please press 1-4. One moment, please, for the first question.
Actually, if I may, I don't think...
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Go ahead.
We're not taking questions yet. I apologize. We're doing questions at the end. I believe, John, what you're alluding to is that we could do some polling questions using the computer. That's exactly right. Is that correct, John?
That is exactly right.
Sorry about that. And
the questions are no longer on the screen, I believe.
Okay, in just a moment, I thought Jasmine was going to provide her information before we do that.
Yeah, okay, actually, Jasmine's ready to present her slides.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I am a Public Health Prevention Service Fellow at the Division of Tuberculosis Elimination with the Field Services and Evaluation Branch. I'm going to be presenting about a survey that was conducted January 14th through 22nd. As John spoke about, the survey is ongoing, but the results, the data is from the survey conducted up until January 22nd. It was conducted by program consultants and the Field Services and Evaluation Branch. And I just wanted to go quickly through our survey items. We asked jurisdictions if they have experienced a shortage of INH 300 milligram tablets in the past 6 months, and if not, if they were expecting to experience a shortage of INH 300 milligram tablets in the next 6 months. We also asked if they had experienced a shortage, how they have been responding. They had 3 choices: switching patients to Isoniazid 100 milligram tablets, obtaining Isoniazid 300 milligram tablets from another jurisdiction, or prioritizing patients. And we also asked them to predict how many LTBI patients would be needing treatment in the upcoming months. Sorry for the formatting issues. It looks like there was a change. But we also asked them to approximate how many doses that they had of Isoniazid 300 and 100 milligram tablets. And now I will go over the results. It looks like about 70% of the jurisdictions who responded, 53 of our 69 jurisdictions actually responded to the survey, and 70% are experiencing a shortage, and this was indicated by if they had already experienced a shortage in the last 6 months or if they were expecting to experience a shortage in the upcoming 6 months. About 30% said that no, they had not experienced a shortage, and 1% was about 2% was a maybe because they had experienced a shortage in the past, but they had recently attained an ample amount of Isoniazid. Also, we asked them to estimate how many LTBI patients would receive treatments in the next 6 months. The median number was 237. And the next 12 months, the median number was 450. We asked them to respond how they were dealing with this problem, and most of the jurisdictions that responded by prioritizing patients, the next amount was switching patients to 100 milligrams. A few were receiving Isoniazid from other jurisdictions, and other jurisdictions hadn't responded at all, or not by any of the measures that we mentioned. And there were a few concerns that we saw pretty often from jurisdictions that they mentioned: increasing costs, which has been mentioned before. One pharmacy increased costs 3,500%. 1 month supply of INH costs $5.7, now it's increasing cost to $200. Misunderstanding of the shortage, they didn't really know what was going on. They didn't know why they weren't receiving drugs anymore. One jurisdiction estimated that they would be experiencing a shortage only because other jurisdictions nearby had experienced a shortage. And also, many jurisdictions were unable to estimate how many LTBI patients would be receiving treatment in the future. Some jurisdictions don't really track LTBI patients at all, and some they couldn't really estimate how much medicine would be delivered to LTBI patients because other organizations such as the Indian Health Service and the VA system were delivering medicine, so they couldn't track those numbers from past years. So with that, I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
Jasmine, hey, this is Dave Ashton. That was fantastic. Thank you very much for adding, kind of what's going on. And as John alluded to before, we'd like to hear from you so we can get have a little bit of our fingers on the pulse of what's happening and what you're experiencing. So, John, I'm going to turn it back to you, and we're going to do the polls. I see that you guys already know how to do it. If you just click on the response. So the first question I have, and I'm going to turn it over to John, but with one response per call-in line, please indicate the type of organization you represent. And I would have gone over how to do it, except it looks like you guys already are experts. So, John, you want to take it from here?
Sure, and we will be pretty brief with this. I think one of the most important aspects of our call today is to allow plenty of time for our participants to raise questions and to have dialogue about the current problem and potential solutions to it. So we ask for each phone line that is currently open, and we see that there are hundreds of you, which is terrific. We ask for one person to represent your group or as an individual, and choose one of the answers here for the first question, which is please indicate the type of organization you represent. And we are getting some interesting results here. We have a whole lot of folks with county and local TB programs, which is wonderful, over 60%, a lot of state programs. Okay. I think everyone probably has responded to that. We thank you, and we're going to move on to the next question. Number 2. Okay. If you represent a TB program, has your program had difficulty procuring either INH or Ethambutol, either or? And I apologize, this will leave out the folks who are individuals or represent organizations other than TB programs. But what we're trying to do here is to ascertain today among our participants where and to what extent there are difficulties. Okay? So we're seeing yes, INH, approximately 52% of our respondents, no, 36% approximately. All right, thank you. INH and EMB, note that there are some. There, 11.4%, both INH and Ethambutol. And I hope that we're going to be able to move toward a discussion of Ethambutol in a little bit. Let's move to the third question. Okay, has your TB program run out of either INH or Ethambutol? Okay, please key in your answer to that question now. Have you run out of either Isoniazid or Ethambutol? So it looks like we're kind of leveling off here, stabilizing. Yes, INH only, about 10 to 11% out currently. Okay? Ethambutol only, one respondent out of the hundreds that we have so far, which is somewhat reassuring. Okay? All right, let's move to question 4. When do you expect your TB program may run out of INH if not resupplied? If you don't receive a shipment today or in the next couple of weeks, when do you expect to run out of Isoniazid? Okay. We have some that would be within 2 weeks. Obviously, we need to know who you folks are, which jurisdictions you're in, and later in this call, we'll talk a little bit about a mechanism for addressing your need. We have a larger proportion expect to run out within 1 month, and then almost a third within 3 months. So obviously, this is an issue that we may all be facing within the next couple of months. Okay, question number 5. How has limited availability of Isoniazid affected your treatment of TB cases and or suspects? And you can check any of these boxes that apply to you. Okay, you see the top option there is prioritize use of INH only for cases and suspects. I have to admit it's a bit of a surprise to me to see the very large number of jurisdictions which have needed to go to that option. And I presume that means no longer treating TB infection. The second option also has a pretty good response rate here. Change to alternative regimens for cases and suspects. And again, we had mentioned substituting one of the fluoroquinolones as the most likely option instead of isoniazid. Quite a few, 27% had changed regimens for cases and suspects. That has significant impact because it is not only an issue with tolerability for patients, but also efficacy. Okay? And then delayed treatment. Thankfully, very, very few. Okay. We have one more question. Let's move to number 6. Question number 6. Is there a question number 6 on our slides? Okay.
Yes,
there we go.
You should be seeing it, John. Some people are starting to respond to it.
Okay. Very good.
It is, how has limited availability of INH affected your treatment of TB infection?
Okay. Yeah, I think this is going to be quite fascinating to see what our results are.
John, are you now seeing the results come up?
Yes, I am seeing them now for number 6. Thanks. Quite a few of our jurisdictions, it looks like approximately half, have prioritized treatment of only high-risk patients with TB infection, for example, close contacts with positive skin tests or positive IGRA results. Others have switched to alternative regimens for treatment of TB infection, again, a very large proportion, and delayed treatment. So we can see here on question number 6 that there has been a significant shift in strategies for conserving the limited stocks of INH that we have, and that is being borne primarily on the shoulders of our treatment for TB infection. So thank you all for participating in this quick and dirty survey. It gives us a much better idea of what we're dealing with, and I'd like to turn this over now to our moderator again.
John, thank you so much for that. I mean, very interesting responses. I agree with you. Especially how I think all of us are being affected, specifically in the treatment of TB infection. And we will talk a little more about that, what impact that has. But I think before we even do that, I think it's very, very important to start looking at what has been the response to the INH shortages, specifically from a CDC perspective, as well as from a state perspective. And Neha Shah is here. As you guys know, she's the field medical officer with the Division of TB Elimination at the CDC, and she's currently assigned to the California Department of Health. So we're going to be able to get two perspectives. And as you guys know, before she moved to California, she was the acting TB controller in Chicago. So I think Neha, we would agree, knows a lot about these kind of field issues. So Neha, thank you so much for sharing and presenting today. How are you doing?
Thanks. I'm glad to be able to present here and give you guys what we know and what we're experiencing in California. I'm going to start, as you said, with talking about CDC's response and then give the California experience. In November, I think it was mentioned earlier, in November of 2010, the CDC was notified that there was a shortage of INH. We did confirm that it was a national shortage, and on December 21st, we issued the notes from the field in the MMWR. At the time that the MMWR was written, there was a shortage in the 300 milligram tablet formulation, but the 100 milligram tablets were available at that time, and they were scheduled to release more INH at the end of December. So the recommendations at the time from the CDC were to encourage programs to switch either their suppliers or to switch to 100 milligram tablets while there was a shortage of the 300 milligrams. A little background about INH. There are 3 suppliers in the U.S., Teva, Sandoz, and VersaPharm. VersaPharm also is the supplier of Isoniazid, which is the combination pill of INH and rifampin. In December, all 3 had reported shortages, as I mentioned, of the 300 milligram tablets, and some had a low inventory or shortage of the 100 milligram tablets. The reason for the shortage at that time that was disclosed by the suppliers was that there was a problem with the active ingredient. However, there didn't seem to be a shortage of INH reported globally anywhere else. I think we went over this a little bit, but some of the potential consequences of an INH shortage include interruptions of therapy as individuals are switched from one regimen to another. There can be a delay, as we saw in the polling question, a delay of initiating therapy as programs look for a way to get enough INH. And some programs have switched, as we saw in the polling, have switched TB cases to a different regimen that can be potentially more toxic, or they switch to different preparations such as a combination pill, which could be more costly to TB programs. Again, as we just saw with the polling questions, a lot of programs are deferring their LTBI patients temporarily and prioritizing only high risk, which can lead to losing patients and missing really key essential case prevention opportunities. What was the CDC's response? Well, we've been working with the National TB Controllers Association and the FDA to identify solutions for this shortage. Unfortunately, in mid-January of this year, we were notified by VersaPharm that they will not be able to release INH until 2014. We released the health advisory notice that went out, the HOM that's pasted here below, on January 28th, regarding providing recommendations on drug allocation during the INH shortage. The health alert recommended that programs assess if prioritizing patients based on whatever supply that they had of INH was needed, and that a suggested prioritization scheme would be for TB cases and high-risk latent TB infection. Additionally, the CDC has worked with Teva and the FDA to outline guidelines for accessing an emergency allocation of Teva's INH supply. The guidelines for that were released on Friday in an email to TB controllers and managers. And I think we might have Teva on the line. We can talk about that a little bit more. But as the INH shortage continues, the CDC is continuing to evaluate and identify other options, both for short-term and long-term management of drug shortages. Sundari, in her presentation, mentioned some of those possible solutions, which are very vast, including importation, working on different regulations. There's a whole host that we're looking into to see what are the long-term solutions that we can apply for this drug shortage. I'm going to turn it over to Dave to see if anybody from Teva or any of the other groups would like to comment about the response before I go on to talk about the California experience.
Yeah, thanks, Nia. Christine Bader, are you there? Christine is actually the Senior Director of Customer Operations with Teva Pharmaceuticals, and one of the things we thought we would have Christine do is to, discuss a little how to secure INH through the emergency stock if it's necessary. So, Christine, are you there? Christine, you may need to push 1 and then 4 if you're on.
That is correct, Dave. She should be able to join.
Christine, just if you are there, and we'll give you one more minute.
I am here, I think.
Hi, Christine, you are here. You're right.
Okay.
I question that all the time if I'm here, but you are here. And thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for everything you're doing. So do you want to take a couple minutes and just briefly talk about how to secure INH through the emergency stock?
Sure. And thanks everyone for letting me have a chance to discuss this today. we were approached, obviously, in a very tight time frame to try to come up with some sort of a emergency stock and a procedure to ship product. This is new territory for Teva as a manufacturer, and obviously it's going to come with some bumps. So as people try to call us and interface with us on trying to get the product, I would ask for some patience, and we are committed to trying to get it to you, but we are, of course, obligated to all of the compliance laws that a manufacturer typically has to abide by, including verifying state licensure, which I know can be a bit of a bear. So I would ask for your patience. But in general, you can call us, and I think the number's been provided, but I'll provide it again. It's 1-800-545-8800, and we've added a prompt to the phone tree. You can just press 8, and you'll go right to somebody who's educated on this program and what we're trying to accomplish. You will be asked how much you need in terms of tablets. We will ask if you have a bottle count preference. We have 30s, 100s, and 1000s. Most of the time no one cares, but we will ask. And then, of course, we will ask for your licensure.
Christine, thank you very much. If you don't mind, Christine, if you can stay on later for questions, that would be fantastic. But I really appreciate you joining us today, and especially what your company is doing to help us with this shortage.
Okay.
Thanks again. What we'd like to do is, Nia, you want to now talk about maybe what California's response to the INH shortage was?
Sure. Thanks, Christine. And it's been really great working with Teva to get this put together for the programs. I think it's going to really help. I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about how California is responding to the INH shortage. A little background about California: we report about 2,300 cases a year. We have 16 jurisdictions throughout the state that have their own TB program for the most part, and they order their own medications. We do not have a centralized supply or distribution for our anti-TB medications. How is California being affected? Well, at the state TB control branch, we've been doing both active and passive surveillance. To date, we've contacted about 24 counties. You can see here in the map, they're color-coded, with varying degrees of case morbidity. We're also doing some passive surveillance as well. About one-third of our counties, at the time we contacted them, were running out of INH within about 2 weeks. And our correction system, one of the largest in the country, will also be running out of INH in about a month. We've asked that jurisdictions, if they are running out of their INH, to prioritize their TB cases and their high-risk LTBIs. And I believe our corrections team has also moved to that prioritization scheme. We also know that at least 2 counties have run out of INH for their cases. Aside from the limited supply of INH, there are other ways that the shortage has affected the TB programs, and I think everyone can relate to these, is that it's included in that increased staff time and resources has been dedicated to procuring medication, and that may mean that programs are ordering more frequently. Some are ordering daily, others are ordering weekly, and that's maybe because they're not getting their full order filled or they've been told to just order more frequently. Many programs are ordering from multiple suppliers just so they can have enough. And a lot of programs are fielding calls probably daily from community pharmacies and providers searching for INH. We've also been told that many staff are overwhelmed and are concerned that they're not going to have enough an uninterrupted supply of INH for their patients. Most programs have modified their protocols to include alternate regimens and to also prioritize patients. And those alternative regimens, as we've mentioned several times, can be more costly for programs. The California Department of Health's TB Control Branch does assist with programs and with their drug shortages. We've been monitoring TB drug shortages for several years. We have a drug shortage team here, and we have been assisting them procuring TB medications. Historically, it's been for second-line TB medications, but recently now with the INH shortage, we've been helping with that as well. California's TB control program and our partners have been very active with responding to the shortage. We've put out alerts on our web pages, as have our partners, the California Tuberculosis Control Association and the Curry International Center. And we've also issued a DERO controller notice, provided a health alert for programs to send out to their own providers, And as mentioned, we've been surveying our jurisdictions to find out the severity of the shortage. We do passive and active surveillance. Counties that are running low will send us emails to let us know their supply. And then we've been contacting the high morbidity counties and corrections who've had a limited supply to see if we can help procure medication. We've tried coordinating sharing of INH among different programs. As I said, we've been helping get medications. We're also looking into having an emergency supply here at the state for programs that need INH. We've helped with the modification of protocols and the alerts. And then just to touch on some of our long-term solutions that we're thinking about, we're considering a centralized supply for anti-TB medications at the state, similar to a model that immunization uses. Immunizations has a centralized supply at the state and then distributes it throughout the state. So we're working with them to see if that's an option. We're also looking into whether we can collaborate with a global drug facility, and we continue to work with the ACET working group on drug shortages to identify some national strategies. I kind of wanted to conclude just with some questions that we've been left with as we've been addressing this shortage, and I think a lot of these questions are other people have had as well, and maybe we can discuss as we go further in this conversation. I think first and foremost, the biggest question is how long will this shortage last? It seems that depending on who you call and when you call, we are all getting slightly different dates, so it'd be nice to know when we anticipate this shortage will end. We've encouraged our jurisdictions to prioritize based on how much INH that they have, but we don't know what's happening nationally, whether that is a concern nationally or not. One of the things that we found interesting was that only the U.S. has been affected by the INH shortage, and it would be interesting to know why that is. And I think John mentioned that there was potentially some price increase in the INH, which we've heard about, and it would be nice to know if that is going to happen and to what degree that would happen so TB programs can budget how much they need for medications. And then in terms of long-term strategies, how do we minimize these drug shortages? I just put down some ideas that we've been thinking about here at California of what to do in the long term and whether we need a different surveillance system or alert system so we're made aware of these shortages hopefully in advance or at least early so that we can modify protocols. Do we need to import medications? And then I think one big question is, do we really need a centralized supply similar to what Canada or Europe or other countries have, and would that help? It may not. But these are the questions we're kind of looking at as we've been faced with this drug shortage and as we move to the future of how do we better respond to this in the future. I think that's all I have from the California perspective. Dave, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Obviously, as the state that has pretty much so many cases of tuberculosis, it's very interesting to see how you are responding and how your state's responding. And I think you'd agree when you're looking at TB cases. We talk about California, Texas, Florida, and New York. And we're very, very lucky to have Dr. Felicia Dworkin, who's the Deputy Medical Director for the Bureau of TB Control. She's also the acting physician in charge of the Corona Chest Clinic, where they oversee drug-resistant and MDR cases. And Dr. Dworkin is kind enough to share with us the INH situation from a New York perspective. So, Felicia, you there?
I am. How are you guys?
Dave and Felicia, just one thing. If people are having interference, can you mention that they should call in with their phone rather than listen with the computer?
Yeah, thanks, Sundari. We've been seeing your chats, and I know some of you are having some problems with the computers. It's delaying or it's cutting out, and that happens sometimes depending on our bandwidth. If you are having problems, please call in with your phone. I think we would agree that the audio is much better. The phone number is, if I'm correct, is Donna. I have it as is it 800-545-8800?
No, Dave.
Go ahead, Donna.
That's okay. I've posted it in chat. It's 800-616-4021. Many people have already switched over, and that's fine, and you're welcome to do that.
Thank you so much. Felicia, how you doing?
I'm good. So I just wanted to thank you all for letting me speak today, and we wanted to give you our New York City perspective on what we've seen in terms of the INH shortage. Just as a little bit of background, our New York City case rate in 2011 was 689 cases, which is a pretty high case rate for nationally. It's actually 8.5 per 100,000 on the national average. So in 2012, we actually had a small drop. We actually have only 651 new cases of TB this past year, but that also translates into contacts where annually we have over 600 contacts that we need to start on LTBI. There are also a lot of other patients that we see in New York City who are started on INH or maybe INH and other combinations of drugs, cases that are suspected of having active TB. A lot of LTBI we see medical risk patients, population risk patients, and some others. And we also see a lot of immigrants and refugees. A lot of people come through CDC immigration refugee stations, especially because we have JFK, Newark, and LaGuardia just so close to us. So within our clinics, we actually have 5 clinics now for New York City that our physicians see patients for the Department of Health in New York City. We actually have a Bureau of TB Control Pharmacy that procures our medications for these 5 clinics, and we dispense them in our clinics. So within the last 6 months, I actually found out that we've dispensed almost 2,800 bottles of INH alone, either for LTBI or active TB cases. And as you can see in the breakdown, we've had almost 250 patients that had active TB in our clinics, 230 contacts that need INH, and then other population and medical risk groups that are almost 800 or 900 patients, another 900 patients that also need INH. So it's a lot of INH being given out by us. There's also another group of patients that don't come to our clinics, and those are seen by private providers or non-health department providers, either in hospitals or private offices, and they need to obtain their medication from either a hospital-based or commercial pharmacy, private pharmacy chains like CVS or Walgreens, or small local pharmacies where they may not be able to procure these medications. If a patient in New York City cannot get medication because they're either uninsured or can't afford it, we do have a program where if they're on DOT, we will provide the medication to the private physician to give to the patient, and that's through our gratis meds program. So a patient, if they can't afford their medication, are guaranteed to get it. So what basically happened is that early in November, we used a lot of Isoniazid in our clinics, and we noticed that we couldn't get it anymore because of the lack of a main ingredient in Isoniazid, so we couldn't get it. And Veripharm said that they couldn't give it to us back until 2013. Unfortunately, we couldn't purchase Rifamate because through our current contract, we couldn't purchase another drug. So, and we also know that it's more expensive than getting Isoniazid, so either way, we couldn't get it. Unfortunately, we had to then change these patients who were getting Isoniazid and on self-administered therapy for active TB. We needed to switch them to individual INH and rifampin. They stayed on self-administered, and we monitored them closely. But as you know, because of the health alert that went out and then the MMWR that came out, obviously we do have a shortage of INH 300 milligram tablets, and that has translated to us as well. Again, we were first notified by our state TB controller in New York State that their providers were also having difficulty in getting INH in New York State. But in New York City, we've only had sporadic instances where patients or providers couldn't get the drug. Thankfully, all were able to get it eventually, and we haven't had to administer to these private physicians as yet. But we're going to have to continue to monitor it because right now, we're starting to see more and more providers come to us and saying they can't get medication for their patients. So we're actually planning a memo to our providers in our community within New York City that we're going to be sending out this information that right now our patients in our clinics are still getting INH because at this moment we do have a supply, but they will get it on a priority basis. Our outside providers if they're unable to obtain INH, they need to, we can provide it to patients who are hospitalized either for suspected or active TB by them contacting us. And if their patients are not hospitalized, they can either be referred to one of our clinics or we can discuss the case individually with the provider. And patients who are on LTBI, that either they can be referred to one of our clinics or they can be given an alternative regimen. At the moment, they can get rifampin if they're unable to get the INH, and those for patients that are, again, being seen by private providers. So while we haven't really seen as much issues in terms of an INH shortage yet, we are starting to see this issue as well. And unfortunately, we don't know how long to anticipate this problem. So that's our perspective at the moment.
Felicia, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And again, we're going to be asking questions real soon, and we'll be able to ask specific questions. But we've heard from California, we've heard from New York, but if we don't hear from Phil Griffin, we have not heard. As you know, Phil is right now currently the Kansas City TB controller, and he's going to be speaking on the approach that they've been taking in the Midwest on behalf of the Midwest TB Controllers Group. Phil, how are you doing today?
Good. I am going to run through real quickly and just say, for many of us out here, of course, when we talk about we in a program, we're talking about me in a program, because there are multiple small programs where the TB controller or TB program manager may be the only primary staff in the office. And so what we have found to be extremely important in situations for us over the years has been an ability to have a good relationship with our neighboring jurisdictions so that we can help bounce information off. So a brief history is that the Midwest jurisdictions, we started meeting about 14 years ago annually, and through that have been able to develop a significant system of support with a lot of routine communication going on. We have shared policies, developing new programs, experiences, asking questions of each other, providing advice and suggestions. We're talking about these blue states in the middle, and there's 11 of us all together that are in some form or fashion a part of this communication loop. So what we have found is there's a lot of advantages in the fact that oftentimes some of the guidance that may come out may not seem as relevant or applicable quickly to us because of the nature of many of our states. We're all pretty similar in one way or another. There's, in large part, even our states with higher higher morbidity still have a greatly rural or frontier lands with a small number of city and urban areas in each of our states. We're low to medium incident states annually, and probably the biggest advantage we have is that we've got very stable long-term leadership in most of these states, ranging from anywhere from 5 to 30 years of leadership experience within our states. So a lot of that to draw on. With the current shortage, some of the first calls to CDC actually came out of this group in late November and early December. And we began with a lot of heavy use of emails between the group by late December, early January as the stock dwindled and messages were changing. Several of us were monitoring the FDA site, and it would get updated and seem to be different every time it was updated as to when supplies would be back in place. Different people were getting different messages from different wholesale suppliers. So just a lot of communication going back and forth that we found real beneficial to at least know what everybody else was hearing. Ultimately, we decided to schedule a group conference call on January 10th. And during that, we just had a general open discussion and found that while some of us were very aware and were already experiencing some of the shortage issues and having trouble getting medication, others had not been impacted yet and really had not paid a whole lot of attention and kind of discounted it, assuming that it would not be something to affect. That kind of served as a wake-up call for some and kind of a balancing out for others. It also became clear that it wasn't only INH, that some of our states in the group had already started experiencing some very low levels of Ethambutol And if you go back to the map that John presented from the NTCA survey, there were several within this group that have the Ethambutol issues on top of the INH issues. So each of us ended up sharing our current situation, including our stock levels, what our supply chain process was, which has really been a significant issue when we talk about it from a larger group perspective. In that, of course, as John said too earlier, when you've seen one state, you can say you've seen, or one jurisdiction, you could say you've seen one jurisdiction of TB. And there is so many significant differences in the way we are able to do business. Some of us are required by state statutes, others are by local contracts, different requirements around how medications can be obtained and dispensed. Some are using central pharmacies, some are using vouchers into a variety of pharmacies throughout the state, and then some of us actually dispense directly from the state under a pharmacy license. So just having that different information and understanding what the different barriers and challenges were has been helpful. Some of the outcomes from the participation of the group has been that those that were not yet aware certainly became much more willing and interested in needing to look into the issue to further determine how long they would be okay. Several began reviewing and adjusting our current policies, developing some priorities, placing restrictions on who would be treated and how, reviewing basically all of our protocols. Most importantly, I think that helped to really speed this process along as we were developing those alerts and so forth is that we all agreed to share those HAN alerts, policy statements, other things between us so that we could review each other's work and oftentimes we could save a lot of effort and not have to recreate the wheel. If one of us had already gotten an alert put together, we could go through that and adjust it to be specific to our state. And as a result, many of us had our health alerts out 2 or 3 weeks prior to the official CDC alert that came out in the last week or two. So by that participation has really helped us manage the limited resources we have and being able to share those resources. We have shared different updates as they arrived. It's been real interesting as we've talked that some jurisdictions will get a letter about something from a particular distributor or some other source, while others have not received that information. And so being able to share back and forth kept us in the loop. And, of course, a lot of that information comes down through the supply chains. And so depending on which supply chain we're in has determined when and who got the information first. We have shared information about the different distribution changes that we're providing, different times, what those messages were, shared resources on different compounding options. Some of the states have had to resort to that, sharing information on successful acquisitions and when they've occurred, who was able to get it, how they got it, so that others have been able to jump over into those realms to get medications if at all possible. And we've also had some offers to be able to share stock amongst ourselves to get through the crisis. And if somebody gets in the dire straits of not having a medication, we'll find a way between us to get it to them and work out the details as we go along there. We've also opened up a new project. The EIS officer assigned to Kansas is working now in the beginning stages of doing a surveillance and documentation project amongst our states. Partially, she's the big outcome that we're looking for is to really monitor how we're moving through this process, looking at policy changes, when they're happening, how they're happening, and what the impact on patients is in the long run, so that we can look for those lessons learned through this, because it's clear that these types of issues will continue to move further and further into the future. And one of the things we've not been able to do in the past is really learn, as we're going through, documenting well enough to be able to get some good lessons learned out of it. So right now she's doing key informant interviews, doing data tracking on the shortages in the jurisdictions in comparison to the group, Part of that key informant interview is actually identifying how the supply chains work, what the limitations and challenges are on various programs, looking at policy level and so forth. Also tracking the alerts and the policy changes as they go through so we can look at the timing of them as well. And again, the goal is to identify and document the lessons learned from the events. Actually going live this week, as soon as I get off this call, I'll be able to start providing the access to each of us within the state. We've developed a SharePoint folder where we'll be able to, rather than just having to send everything out back and forth through email, we'll be able to post our alerts and policies up into a SharePoint that all of us will have secured access to so that we can keep current on that information. We'll also have it there in archive status so that if one state is at a position later down the road that other states have been in previously, those documents will be there without having to go back and look through and find them within old emails and so forth. So just kind of keeping that central depository available and tracking our conversations and so forth. The big thing is a constant reminder that we're not alone in all of this, that we can find support, suggestions, models, ideas that are only a phone call or email away, or as of today, we'll be able to visit the shared file. And just want to acknowledge all of those that are participating in the project and all of us that have worked together through this, through each of the states and local jurisdictions. So thank you.
Phil, thank you so much. I mean, I think one of the key points you're bringing back is the fact that communication is key. I mean, and not only is it communication among ourselves, but we also have to make sure that our voices are being heard by the policymakers to make sure that they understand what's happening. And because of that, we're really pleased to have Coco Jervis with us. She's a senior policy advocate with the Treatment Action Group, and she's going to talk to us today about TB drug shortage advocacy, because we have to make sure that we are being heard, that there is a shortage in what we need. So, Coco, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this call. As he said, my name is Coco Jervis. I'm the Senior Policy Associate at Treatment Action Group, which is based in Washington, D.C., or I am based in D.C. TAG was born out of the ACT UP movement, for those of you who are familiar, over 20 years ago. We're a science-based HIV, TB, and hepatitis treatment research advocacy organization that works to speed up the development of some of the new therapeutic treatments, vaccines, prevention, interventions, and, of course, the fight for a cure for HIV, TB, and hepatitis C. At TAG, our primary TB work involves campaigning for zero TB deaths, which is to say that we are extremely passionate about pushing the envelope and holding our political leaders accountable to ensure, universal access to the latest diagnostic tools, which includes drug susceptibility testing, appropriate treatment and prevention modalities, and maximizing community empowerment. So on the last slide, I have a link to the Zero TB Deaths Declaration. If you have not already seen it, you can learn more about it and get involved with that movement. This year, we are stepping up our advocacy on the domestic TB front. We are working hand-in-hand with some of the partners who have been on this call. We're working with Stop TB USA, NTCA, members of the TB Roundtable, and representatives of the newly formed TB Congressional Caucus, which was just started last year. We're working to try to raise awareness about some of the domestic TB issues and address some of the ongoing funding issues that bedevil some of the local and state TB control programs. We're also raising for the first time the TB drug shortage issue with them. So to this end, 2 weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks ago, we organized a really incredibly successful community consultation in D.C. When we first organized it, I thought we would maybe get 10 to 15 people in the room, but we ended up having at capacity over 65 folks and people on the line from internationally. It was put together by members of the the Federal TB Drug Shortage Group of ACET, PASS, ATS, Results, and the IDSA. And some of those speakers on this call also gave presentations. The goal of the meeting was twofold. We wanted to have a forum to garner increased multi-stakeholder education, awareness, and action on this issue. And to this end, we had folks from FDA, CDC. We had folks from the WHO Global Drug Facility there. We had a couple manufacturers there. VersaPharm was there. Janssen representatives were there. We had patient advocates, and we had the press. We had journalists from the Wall Street Journal attended, and a couple of some other publications as well, because as you probably know, this has been getting, especially the INH issue, a lot of press attention, and we wanted to capitalize on that, especially if there's a journalist who's really interested in covering this issue. A lot of us have been having these discussions in silo, and we thought it would be great to bring people together to meet face-to-face and talk about this. Now, of course, this was just a small meeting, and a lot of folks are doing great work, like we'll hear it on the call. So this is just one little part that we're trying to do to raise the awareness about this on a federal level. The first half of the meeting, we had presentations. We actually filmed the entire consultation, so we're going to put that online as well. We had presentations from the FDA, CDC, NTCA, GDF. We had a young woman who had MDRTB from Texas come to speak about it. We also heard from the medical director of the Baltimore City Health Department TB program, who really put this issue in the context for some of us who are new to this issue. He talked about some of the other stressors that are leading to sort of a cascade of suboptimal care and treatment outcomes for his patients, despite the best efforts that he's been doing. And his story, I think, is sort of similar to what I'm sure other people have been experiencing in local and TB programs. In particular, he told the story about how last year he had an uninsured MDRTB patient, and he had that patient on capreomycin, but he had to take them off of that medication because of a shortage issue. They had to switch the patient to a painful intramuscular amikacin shots, which was nearly intolerable for this patient. And the program couldn't get lidocaine, or they couldn't put a PICC line in because of financial constraints with the TB program. So, I mean, even after him having to endure some of the painfulness of the amikacin shots, they had to switch him again because amikacin, they had experienced a shortage of that drug as well. And they wanted to put him on Untitled, but it was too expensive, and so they had to switch him to a different regimen of Moxie and some other things. And so they had to basically settle for a suboptimum regimen to treat this particular patient. And he spoke about this, and he also spoke about the fact that on top of the drug shortage issues, he wasn't able to get his patient access to audiology services. He wasn't able to get some of the basic support this person needed as he was living in a prolonged isolation environment. He couldn't work. He had no way to get income for food and pay rent. He went through his entire life savings. It was really a sad situation, and so I think that was he was sort of telling the story. And I think it reminds all of us that we not only need to address the issue of TB drug shortages in the U.S., but we need to become advocates for TB patients in general. And we need to preserve and expand funding for state and local TB control programs so that what has happened in the 1980s with the resurgence of TB doesn't happen again. So, again, during the community consultation, in the afternoon part, after they had presentations, we had folks break out into smaller groups so that they could start some of the conversations that they would continue offline. But there was a state, federal, and global advocacy working group. There was a group that was made up of researchers, clinicians, and TB program managers, and one for manufacturers and supply chain managers. And the smaller group folks met for a short period of time, and then came back to the broader group and talked about some of their, things for recommendations for moving forward. They also talked about where needs to be further discussion, what other questions were being raised that needed to be looked into further. We did not develop any concrete solutions because obviously this is a very, very complex and multifaceted problem that involves, different issues with different drugs. But we simply sort of raised questions for further conversation, shared information, and we set up a roadmap for further work. And the participants in the consultation will be hosting quarterly teleconferences. We want to invite folks from this call to participate who want to get involved with federal advocacy. There'll also be a meeting report, and as I mentioned, it was recorded, so that will be made available to folks online. Also, it really garnered some of the attention from FDA folks and from congressional caucus folks. You know, FDA is sort of a political body, and they have been hearing a lot about the cancer drug shortage issues. It's been raised in the press multitude of times in the last couple of years. They haven't heard much from the TB community. This was a really great opportunity to show, you know, how much interest the community has on it, and that they really need to focus. And in the very when we were organizing the meeting, there was no FDA representative who was available to talk. There was none up until the very, very last couple of days or weeks when there was some of the TB congressional caucus members called the FDA talking about the INH issue. And before you know it, we had someone come speak to us. And obviously it was a good example of how, you know, if we, you know, shine a light on this issue, the FDA will respond. So I just want to quickly move ahead because we want to open it up for questions, of course. Some of the working group had a couple action items and recommendations. I'll just skip quickly through this. One of the biggest issues I want to talk about, which was mentioned already on this call, was communications. The Fukushima disaster happened, you know, in the spring of 2011, knocking out one of the main manufacturers that produced the API for INH. We in the United States actually started experiencing the early warning signs of the impending shortage of INH in the summer of 2012 or even the spring. And the way we know about this is that there was a first indication that came from INH that one of the AIDS clinical drug trial group studies, there was a study going on with ACTG. They were using INH for one of their studies, and they were reporting problems accessing the drug. But because of the poor communication and poor interagency collaboration, CDC was not notified of this early warning sign that the NIH has been experiencing since the spring until November of 2012. And so because there is no mechanism in place to track these issues, and there's always delays in notification, and there's actually no clear pathways for communications between CDC and NIH and other departments. This is a big systemic issue that really needs to be dealt with, and it's a real breakdown for us. One of the things that TAG wants to do is to develop a quarterly TB drug watch newsletter. The AIDS community developed it for tracking the AIDS drug assistance program waiting list that developed over the last couple of years, and there's a way that advocates themselves could sort of, you know, raise attention and to do their part in sort of helping to track these issues for members of Congress and for the media and to keep the limelight on this issue. As Sundari mentioned, there's a domino effect that occurs when there's a shortage or interruption of a particular drug. We're now experiencing the issue with INH with the 300 milligram. People might want now to switch to rifampin, or they might switch to the 100 milligram. And we need to be thinking right now at this moment about forecasting for the potential shortage of the 100 milligrams, which could occur later on this year. There is a lot of discussion, of course, about creating a safety net or repository to stockpile TB drugs, how would that be the program be housed, how would it work, how would we deal with expirations. Those are the types of things that need to be worked out. Also, how can we utilize the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Program to help with surveillance and the response to this? These are some of the issues that we really need to continue to discuss. In relation to surveillance and tracking, some of the most interesting ideas that were brought up during the meeting was about changing the directionality of early notification. As you know, currently the way it's supposed to work is that manufacturers are supposed to communicate to FDA, and then they're supposed to communicate to TV programs. You know, anyone can go online and see on your FDA website what's being posted, but that is really a reactive method to following this. It does not prevent the shortages from happening. And some of the participants brought up the idea that we really need to empower TB control programs like some are already doing here in the Midwest to become more proactive so that they can be able to predict using epi data and what they have experienced for previous years, what they actually need. And they need to be able to communicate those sort of drug needs to CDC more effectively ahead of time so that there's better ways to predict and to be able to track how much a TB program actually needs. And then sort of to sort of sum up a little bit, folks talked about redefining latent TB. It's a very salient argument for legislators in order to get more funding to talk more about the spectrum of disease and talk about treatment as prevention. If we're treating people who are infected with TB, you can prevent active cases and stopping primary and secondary infections. So this is some of the type of talking points that really work well with funders. And sort of lastly, in this, as an advocate, of course, we always, I, myself, and other advocates here in D.C., we focus on what we can do to help you guys. And, you know, we, as a TB community, sort of suffer a little bit from the tyranny of so-called success. The more that the incidence looks like it's decreasing, the more that the funding drops. And that's a really big problem for us. And we really need to keep this issue in the limelight so that we don't have what happened in the 1980s, which was sort of a deterioration of the funding of the programs and then a resurgence. This year we have some great opportunities to raise the awareness about TB. We have the TB reauthorization bill that is set to expire in 2014. We want to put some new language in there requiring the FDA to report to Congress about drug shortages related to TB on a quarterly basis. We also want to tie some advocacy around immigration bills or other bills outside of just TB-specific bills to see how we can sort of have wraparound services for those who are uninsurable under the Affordable Care Act so that they can get services, and they can also get not just treatment and care services, they can get some of the auxiliary services paid for that they need, similar to the way that HIV community members get through Y&Y, to pay for if they need to get food or rent or the things that they need to do to survive if they're going to be in isolation. There's also a recommendation of having a 1-800 number to report drug stockouts. We understand that some folks don't feel comfortable calling the FDA to report on particular drug shortage issues that they experience, and so developing that was one of the recommendations. Just quickly, the next couple of weeks, there's some exciting opportunities ahead. You know there's World TB Day, which is March 24th. We are going to be acknowledging World TB Week, which is from March 17th to March 24th. We'll have 2 congressional hearings, and we're going to the drug shortage issue is going to be a major issue during both of the congressional hearings. I would really love it if everybody on this call knew who their state senators and their state House of Representative members were, and they were to ask everyone if they were involved in TB Congressional Caucus, because right now we need as many folks to join the caucus as possible. And we are, of course, dealing with sequestration and budget issues, and so making the sort of case about we can't just make a case for more money. We really have to tell the story, and we really need advocates such as yourself to communicate to us and tell us what you're experiencing on the ground so we can communicate that to members of Congress who may know nothing about TB in order to keep it sort of relevant. And I just quickly wanted to sort of end by talking about an example of some of the work we're doing at TAG related to sort of an ongoing advocacy and action. As you know, there's in 2011, the CDC recommended the use of Warkentin with Isoniazid to shorten the regimen of LTBI. And one of the biggest barriers we heard from folks on the ground for this new regimen was because of the price. And so TAG has been working with advocates to help lower the price of Warkentin. It started at around $73 per box, and around September 2012, they lowered it to about $51, but many programs reported that still was too high. So we have been looking very, very closely with Sanofi, and we have been pressuring them with the global TB tab and with some local advocates here. Just last week, we sent a private letter to them with 37 endorsers requesting $35 per box. It was endorsed by, as you can see, some of the Academy of Pediatricians and other, the American Medical Association and other folks. And so this is just sort of one of the examples of when you guys give us an issue at TAG to work on, we can try to push as much as we can in ways that you may not necessarily be able to do because of some of the constraints of being working for CDC or being part of a department, that we can really push for it on the outside and try to make them change. So that's all I wanted to say. I really encourage you to call me or send me emails if you would like to talk about some of these specific issues and stay involved in some of the campaign work that we're doing. Thank you.
Coco, thank you so much for everything you're doing and supporting everything that we need here in the field. I mean, we can't do it. This is really a partnership, and we need all the partners. So thank you, Coco, and thank you, TAG. At this point, what we really like to do is open the floor for questions because we've been watching the chat, and there's been some great things going on. I know there's a lot of questions. We've been getting we've been getting some of our questions through email, and as you guys know, if you look at the screens, which will switch, you'll be able to see how to ask questions via email, or we'd love to hear from you. And right now what I'd like to do is ask the operator to give you directions on how to call in a question. Operator, could you please call in, could you please tell us how to ask a question by phone?
Certainly. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, to register for a question over the phone line, please press 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone keypad. Please press 1 followed by the 4. We do have a question. Our first question is from Melissa Hemsley. Please go ahead with your question. Melissa, your line is open. Please go ahead.
Remember, in order to open your line, if you push a 1 and then 4.
We'll move to the next question. Our next question is from Francis Ota. Please go ahead with your question. Francis, your line is open. Please go ahead. Our next question is from Leroy Smith. Mr. Smith, your line is open. Go ahead.
We think this is Lee Reichman. In case...
No, I think Leroy Smith is better, actually.
I was going to say the same thing, David, but congratulations to you all for an outstanding webinar. It was really very well done and very informative. I have a question and a comment. The first question is, and we wrote this to CDC and didn't really get an answer of it, is all of us have taken medicine beyond the expiration date and it all appeared to work. And it's intuitive that the medicine doesn't lose its potency on the expiration date. So there must be a known period of time after the expiration date when a medication can still be used. When I was a Peace Corps doctor, we were told 6 months was okay, and we never had any problems with it. So could somebody please find out from the manufacturer or FDA what that flexibility is to give us some more flexibility to use the current stocks? That's the, does anyone know what the flexibility is? That's the question. And the comment is that several years ago, CDC in its wisdom in the statement writing came out with something called targeted testing and treatment for latent tuberculosis infection. Now, I've heard in my state, New Jersey, and I know anecdotally of several other places, where people are using isoniazid willy-nilly on anyone with a positive skin test. And yet, if we target it, we might be able to save some isoniazid. And I think it's time for programs to step up and stop letting people waste isoniazid. Thank you very much.
Well, Lee, thank you. If I can first, to address your first question, I think the best is that I'd like to give time to get that answer because I think it's a very, very important one. And what we could do is we can get an answer. We could post it on our website as well as the other RTMCC websites if they want, so we can get the answer out. But specifically, I also think that's important. It is, we don't want to waste any INH, but I think the big problem is production and getting new INH. But you are right, any drop helps. The second part, just to comment, Lee, and is that you're 100% right. I think one thing we're all looking at this INH shortage, and obviously it's something that we're dealing with. But it also is a time that we have to stop and start thinking about what we do and how we use it. And I think one of the things, at least here in Florida, it's really made us stop and emphasize what should we be doing with our INH and prioritizing it. And I think that is the key message because I think we should all be looking on how do we prioritize our INH and making sure that all of us are doing that, because I think you'd agree if we don't all do that, then we may be using precious INH in places we may not need it immediately. And I want to go beyond just INH if I can for 1 second, but also talk about testing. I mean, one of the other things to really look at is skin testing versus IGRAs, in the sense that IGRAs potentially also may be saving INH, because if we have less false positives, we may be able to start less individuals on INH. So I want to say it's not just about INH, but looking at LTBI, again, in general, and trying to see what is the best way to conserve very precious resources. Just as comment. We have a what do you call it, a question online, and we're getting a couple of different questions about we're having issues with drug shortages. There's also the question: are we having shortage of the PPD shortage? And is this nationwide? And there has been some shortage of questions of shortage of PPD. Sundari, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to have Ken respond to that.
Okay, so we just heard briefly, but we don't know how widespread it is in terms of the reported shortage of PPD. And also it has to do, I think it was limited to Applesol, not necessarily Tuberculosis when I heard about it. But it's something we're going to ask our consultants to be on the lookout for. And
one thing we could do is do a polling question to see how many people on this line are having a PPD shortage.
Ken, the issue is Tuberculosis, not Applesol, and it's primarily dealing with the 50-dose vials. I just talked with them yesterday.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I mean, Donna, would you mind maybe putting up a question quickly just to ask about how many individuals who are participating are having or experiencing a shortage? Thanks.
Yeah, and what, Dave, what exactly would you like it to say?
Just how many individuals are on the phone line are experiencing a shortage? It's Applesol, is that correct?
Are you experiencing a shortage of PPD? Yes, no, I don't know.
So it's Tuberculosis, not Applesol.
I apologize. Tuberculosis. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry. And then, if I can go to another question that we're getting a lot of, and something we're seeing too is, in the switch to using alternative regimens for LTBI, it seems that we're using more rifampin. And the question is that, as we start switching to alternative regimens, the question and concern is, are we going to start seeing some rifampin shortages? And I know that it's been discussed, at least in Florida, we have not seen any rifampin shortages. Ken, we have Ken Castro on the line. And Ken, while we have you on the line, are you aware of any shortages so far that has been seen with rifampin?
Not that it has come to my attention.
Yeah, we have not had any report of rifampin shortage recently. Not that I'm aware of, Dave.
The biggest issue, I think you'd agree with rifampin, is that rifampin, the advantages are obviously that we could use it in short course for 4 months, but the problem is, obviously, as was already discussed, some of the other potential interactions, specifically with other drugs, and that becomes the issue.
Right, why don't we do a quick question on rifampin, too? Because we have the PPD shortage. Looks like about 20% of those who responded are having the PPD shortage issue, about 31 different jurisdictions, perhaps. So.
Correct. So let's give Donna the question. The question is, Donna.
Have you experienced a shortage of rifampin? Yes, no, I don't know.
One of a couple other questions we're seeing, and it's true, is that while we started having INH shortage, we started also seeing other preparations, like, as we said, rifamate, and yes, there seems to be more difficulty in getting some of the other preparations. Operator, while we're waiting for the poll, do we have somebody on the line with a question?
Yes, sir, we do. Our next question is from Mark Labado. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I have a concern about the recommendation to, if there are absolute shortage of INH, it's not available, then for our TB cases to switch over to fluoroquinolones. We spend a lot of time trying to educate people not to jump to the second-line drugs, in particular to fluoroquinolones, for a variety of reasons, including developing drug resistance. So I think it would be good to go through a discussion and think of alternatives, whether we're going to extend and use 9-month treatment courses, use other drugs, ethionamide, or, perhaps if you have a high suspicion of drug resistance, then to use fluoroquinolones in your initial regimen. But, it's really only 1% of our cases, so a blanket statement like that, I think, needs to be maybe further thought about.
Yeah, Mark, I agree. And let's, Nia, in California, where you've had a couple of different counties that have had absolutely no INH, what have you done in those cases, among your active cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have luckily been able to, brokers having other counties who may have extra, at least for the short term, share their INH. So we haven't, as far as we've been informed, had to change anybody over to a fluoroquinolone-based regimen.
And what about, we have not had that, that issue either, but, we also could just use rifampin, ethambutol, and PZA, without INH. But again, we've just been, through prioritization, been able to get INH for our active cases because that's our number one priority. Has anybody else on the phone had to go away from INH in active cases? Well, why don't we ask that question? I see that the first question is, are you experiencing a shortage of rifampin? And the vast majority of individuals are saying it looks like no. So, Donna, I'm going to really challenge you here, Donna. So why don't we ask the question, have we had any cases where we have not been able to use INH in active TB disease? Sundari, any comment on that?
So we have definitely heard from some jurisdictions that they're having to borrow Isoniazid from neighboring jurisdictions. For example, in California, there was a situation where to treat active TB disease, they had to borrow INH one county to another. I just want to clarify that the guidance put out in the health alert stated to use rifampin, EMB, PZA, and consider adding a fluoroquinolone if the jurisdiction felt it was appropriate, not switching to fluoroquinolone instead of INH, So I think it was consistent with our guidelines.
I agree, Mark, but great question. And as you can see, the vast majority of people are saying no, they have not. But there are a couple, it looks like around 4 individuals who have said that they have. And I agree with I think the sentiment, Mark, that you're bringing up, which is that I think we should do everything possible to make sure that we use INH in our active cases. And prioritization is key. I think that is one of the strong messages I think that's coming from the CDC. Ken, would you agree with that?
Yes,
I want to hear Ken. I don't want to hear you.
I'm sitting right next to Sundari, and yes.
Right. All right, Ken. Operator, do we have another call on the line?
Yes, we do have another question from Isala Schechter. Please go ahead.
I don't know, the hour is getting late, and this was a question I had from earlier on in the talk, and that was, why now? Has there been some change at the FDA that there are more instances where manufacturing issues have come up, like talk about shards of glass and so on? Why now? Why not 10 years ago?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gisela. I know Dr. Saliba from the FDA was on the line, but I know he may have had to run. Is Dr. Saliba still on the line from the FDA?
Dave, she emailed me saying she had to leave promptly, so I don't think she is. But Gisela, that is an excellent question, and I think that we can certainly ask that, and also we should post that on the web as well, Dave.
So, Gisela, this is Ken. One of the things that, if you go to the FDA Global Initiative to their webpage, you'll see that part of the other thing that's happening is about 70% of active pharmaceutical ingredients for drugs manufactured in the U.S. are coming from overseas, and that may have not been the case in the past. So one of the initiatives at FDA is to improve global regulatory capacity to address this reality that differs now from what it used to be 25 years ago.
Thank you very, very much. I know the hour is late. I know that we're over 3 o'clock, and we still have questions to answer. And I think we're committed to try to answer as many questions as we can. So we'd like to invite you to stay, but we understand if you need to leave. And if you do have any questions, if you put it onto our webpage, we'd be happy to get the answer back to you. And remember that we are archiving this entire event, so even later on you can go back either on the website or on our app, and you can hear the answers to your questions. So thank you, for sticking with us. Operator, do you have another question on the line?
We do. On the line of Jackie Andula, please go ahead.
Yes, I had a question. I was making some comments. We live about 10 minutes from Canada. I've been in contact with the regional provincial health department, and they have plenty of INH in Canada. And I was wondering why, is it legal for us to use these medications if we can obtain them? I know that Americans regularly take scripts across the border to get them filled because medications are cheaper in Canada. It was something we were looking into, and I have a few calls into some provincial doctors in Toronto as well.
Sure. Sundari or somebody from the CDC, do you want to answer that, or?
Yeah, actually, we'll have Ken respond to that.
So we're in conversation with FDA, and I'm ignorant about our ability to import drug that is not FDA approved. So we have that question out there to our colleagues at FDA, because we're looking at the ability to import other quality assured drugs that are procured by the Global Drug Facility to address these considerations. So I would think that drugs produced in Canada, approved there and not by FDA, would fit into the same realm and domain.
Yeah, and let's see. I think Dr. Saliba, are you on the line, Johanna? Yeah. So she did answer the question about the expiration. She said yes, FDA will expedite review for extension of expiry, especially in case of shortage, but the firm has to provide data to support the extension for expiration date. So that was the one thing we have an answer on. But that is an excellent question. I think, again, that needs to go to FDA, and we could, Dave, I suggest you put that in your website as well.
Will do. And Ken, thank you for that answer. I do know, on the other hand, and it happens that patients are taking their prescriptions over the border, but I agree. I think we need a clearer answer before we publicly come up with a clear answer for what happens with outside imported drugs. We're getting a question here that I think is very interesting. It's the question of patients who were placed on INH and have gotten 3 to 4 months of INH. The question is, can they be switched to rifampin, and if so, how? And how long should they be on it? And I guess to piggyback on that, we're also getting a lot of questions on, shortening the recommendations from 9 months to 6 months. And, I'm wondering, John, would you like to comment on that? Or Sundari, would you like to comment on that?
Let me just have Ken respond to that. He's got to go soon, but...
So, could you repeat the question, David, please?
Sure. I feel like we're on a game show here. You got the right
Right.
Okay. So the first question was, and I'm sorry, let's break it up to two. So for those patients who've completed 3 to 4 months of INH, and now there's a shortage, the question is, should they be considered to switch to, let's say, rifampin, or even, let's say, 3-HP for 3 months instead of completing for another 3 months of INH or 6 months of INH, or if they, or should they just be left on? Like in Florida, we've said that if you've committed to somebody to INH, we want to continue and we want to complete it, so we don't get into those problems. But I guess the answer is, the question is, what about, how do you feel about switching to rifampin? And if so, would you complete another full 4 months of rifampin or 3 months of 3-HP, or would you consider shortening it since they already got 3 months of INH?
These are going to be, need to be made on a case-by-case basis. And I would go with the lesser of the two evils. Is it better to switch over and make sure that the person completes a full course of therapy than to leave them stranded halfway through the course? So the lesser of the two evils there would be to switch over. But if, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and
Dave, I think you'd agree.
There would be no data to support reducing the duration with rifampin because a person got 2 or 3 months of INH, because that data just doesn't exist. Again, it's hand-waving an expert opinion. So the other thing that I think is constructive, though, is to consider the 12-dose weekly regimen, because it is the shortest regimen and uses the fewest pills of INH.
Right, and I think you'd agree that this has to be done on a case-by-case basis.
Definitely.
I mean, it really depends on what are the medications and what's the indications. But there, like you said, Sundari, there really is no firm footing to suggest that you can shorten it. I think once you've committed, you either complete or you start another, regimen. But then again, I think you have to commit to completing. And
I think another very interesting aspect to consider is, should patients get 6 months of Isoniazid instead of 9 months? Now, I mean, some programs do that even now before there was a shortage. So it is something to consider and throw out there, since the drug's been studied for both 6 and 9 months.
Yeah. I'm just going off the topic just a little, because I was looking at the chat, and there was a lot of discussion on the chat room about being distributed 3 months of medications for a patient, and then that patient defaults or they can't find it. Now they're no longer able to use those medications because you can't return it back for reasons of that they don't know if the medications were altered or anything else. And there was some questions about, should we be seeking some exemption from the FDA so that you could use those meds. But I think the more important message is, I think right now it's very, very important to only be at most distributing 30 days of INH and not 3 months, just in case this happens. And, Ken, I know we have you for a short period of time, and, what I really like about, asking you is that, we're not going to pay you a penny for any of this, unlike the exorbitant fees we're paying Sundari. So, Ken, any
luckily
comment
for you,
on...
Ken isn't here any longer. So,
okay, then Sundari,
lucky for me, I should say.
Sundari, your I guess the question is, the importance of only dispensing 30 days of INH instead of 3 months at this particular time, to make sure there's enough INH for everyone. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that's important, and I actually think that's what should happen anyhow, because we would like our patients taking LTBI treatment regimens to be seen monthly, and I think most programs would agree that, in fact, giving somebody 3 months supply of drug doesn't ensure that the patient returns every month for evaluation.
I agree. Operator, do we have another question on the line?
We do have a question from the line of Susan Max. Please go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to make a comment about the cost-effectiveness studies that are out there, and there are a couple of good studies that show that 4R is cost-effective over 9H, and also we have a recent study showing that 3HP is cost-effective over 9H. So those are acceptable alternatives that are recommended, and but I do want to point out, though, for HIV-infected persons, those aren't recommended regimens yet, and 9H is still recommended, and that's, again, one of our highest risk groups.
Suzanne, thank you so much for adding that evidence-based data.
I mean, and I think our experience is exactly that. Not only is it, I think you'd agree, there's also very good data, not only just that it's more cost-effective, that we're getting much better completion rates. I think the big issue is just needing more data to support the efficacy, though, and if you look at CDC recommendations, INH for 9 months is still the gold standard, but you are right. I think situations like this really make us re-examine other regimens, and definitely cost effectiveness is one of the keys. I would just add one thing I think we all know, but we have to state, is that before using any of these regimens, but I think you'd agree, especially rifampin, we have to make sure our active disease is ruled out. I mean, that is the biggest concern we have. But thank you for that comment. That was great, and I totally agree.
I just wanted to add that
Whoop, I think we may have lost her. Hello? Whoop, I think we lost her.
Yeah, you should probably move on to the next question.
Yeah, operator, do we have another question?
We do have a question from the line of Peter Davison. Please go ahead.
Hi. So I actually put this in the chat hopper at the beginning of the seminar, but we've had kind of an interesting situation. One of the requests that we've received that was submitted from a health department in Michigan for the emergency allocation was bounced back, and Teva made the response from Teva was that they didn't want to see a physician's name on the license associated with the request. They actually wanted a pharmacy, and in digging into this, we're being advised that this drop shipment process is specific for, sending medications to pharmacies, not individual providers. I guess, if that's the case, it's not something that was inherently clear, but I guess the other question is, in states that tend to be home ruled and decentralized, I think that could be kind of a snag, because a lot of health departments are accustomed to getting meds shipped directly to them under a physician's orders. So I'm just kind of wondering if there's a strategy or if anybody else has encountered this.
So, thanks. Very good question. Maybe if Christine Bader, are you still on the line? And
I'm on the line.
Okay. Would you like to comment on the requirements, because there are obviously legal requirements that you must meet, and why why they're in place and what to do about them?
So typically, as a manufacturer, we don't ship directly even to a pharmacy, but we do have the means to verify pharmacy licensure. It's just a step that we don't normally take. We do not have the means to verify doctor licensure. So we realize that that's a challenge. I have my team working on a process where we may be able to work with a wholesaler. So whoever normally, let's say distributor A is where the health department typically gets product. We can, of course, ship product as a manufacturer to distributor A. So we would need to work in concert with that distributor or wholesaler to make sure that they earmark that emergency shipment for the public health facility. And we're working on that procedure, and I think we're getting close. It's going to be a little bumpy. We're going to need everyone's patience, but that is our plan.
Excellent. I mean, and again, just, so if I'm correct then, I mean, potentially, Christine, what you could do is if the particular program had a pharmacy that they dealt with, that pharmacy then could contact you and make the arrangements. Is that correct?
Yes. With no delay at all, we can ship to any pharmacy, a local hospital that's willing to work with a physician, any type of clinic or facility license we can do immediately with no workaround. If the only licensure available is a doctor's licensure, then we're going to have to sort of go through a middle path. But we've done this before. There are some precedents for it. It tends to add 1 or 2 days to the process. But as long as that doctor has a person in their office that we can work with that knows where they typically get drug with, we will work to try to facilitate a solution.
Okay, so can I follow a little bit? I mean, the option of going, shipping to a pharmacy is, I guess that's fine. In that case, is it acceptable to basically have the pharmacy receive a shipment? The question then is, who gets billed, and is the pharmacy allowed to release those meds to the health department?
So typically what we would do is wherever the pharmacy normally gets their products from, so let's say they get it from one of the large drug wholesalers, 90% of pharmacies do, the bill would go through their wholesaler and they would pay the bill in their normal pattern of payment.
Okay, so the pharmacy
I'm hearing this is maybe more of a reimbursement issue?
No, well, it's several issues. And
we can certainly talk offline, and that might...
Yeah, I was just about to say, one of the things I'd like to emphasize again is I'd really like to thank Teva for being on the line and reaching out. And I think that the best thing on an individual case basis, you're hearing a commitment to try their best to work with you. And I think that's the key is please call Teva, if I'm correct, Christine, and this way you can work on an individual basis. But I want to thank you for being on the line, as well as I'd like to thank Carl Meredith from Versa, a farm, who's also on the line. Again, trying to work, hear what the issues are and see how we can best serve our patients. So thank you. We're getting a couple different questions, but one of the things we kind of touched upon is, the correctional facilities. And I have a question here from one of our participants, Sue Lane, who's asking, in jails where mostly the patients are there only for a short time, is that one of the places that maybe we should consider how we're using INH and should be targeted in a different way, maybe for, if they're not going to be there to complete therapy, maybe that's not the group, especially if they don't put it into a very high risk, that we'd want to start. Sundari, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think, again, that, there's no general guidance with respect to any particular group like corrections, but it's something to consider. I mean, we do have a lot of LTBI and active disease in that population. I know Farah Parvez is not on the line, but I know Mark Labato's on. I don't know, Mark, do you want to comment on it?
Mark, if you're going to, I think you have to push 1-4 if I'm correct.
And I'm also seeing whether Sarah Burr from Corrections is on the line.
I didn't see.
I don't see her, but I think it's a good question. I don't know that there's an answer.
Just one, just a comment, if I may. I think it's a great question, Sue, and the thing also is to really look at, one of the things we always believe in, if you look at the CDC statement, it's always the decision to test is the decision to treat.
Right.
And in Florida, we always added and complete. And I really think that that's one area in the jails that, short-course therapy, especially if the health departments can support it once the inmate is discharged, it's key. I think to start people without the ability to complete them is in a lot of ways a waste of resources. And I think it's a good question. And again, I think the key is if you do have the ability to complete them, then definitely INH is the way. But you are right; it's always a challenge.
Absolutely, I think the short course regimen, it's actually clearly been implemented in Bureau of Prisons, and they are tracking patient outcomes and completion rates and that sort of thing, adverse events, all that. So I think we'll have some good data to guide the use of INH rifapentine for LTBI treatment in that group soon. But I think we should also look at other situations in which we test but don't treat. I mean, there's a lot of situations where we're not really following targeted testing, and you alluded to this before or actually mentioned it. And I think we need to revisit, and Lee did too, I think, we need to revisit the guidelines for targeted testing.
I agree.
Oh, and Dave, one thing, I don't know if Carl Meredith from VersaPharm is still on the line, but we thought maybe he may want to speak to the EMB issue.
Mr. Meredith, are you on the line? You may want to push 1-4, I think, to
He may have had to sign off. I don't know.
All right.
That's okay. Let's move on.
Do we have another call? We're probably going to take 3 more calls, and then we're going to call it. But let's take another call that we have. Do we have somebody else on the line, operator?
Yes, we do. From the line of Deborah Hallenstein. Please go ahead.
Hi, David. This is Deborah Hallenstein from Missouri.
Hey, Deb, I've been seeing your chats. They're fantastic, and your questions. As a matter of fact, you just beat me to the punch. I was going to ask your next one, so why don't you do it in person?
Okay. So I wasn't sure if those chats were still going through, but that's actually what I was hoping to ask for. And if I could jump back to a comment that was being discussed a little bit back. In Missouri, we get 3 months' supply of medication at a time for each patient from a pharmacy contracted by the state. They're dispensed in 1-month bottles, so we only give them to the patient 1 month at a time, but we get 3 months at a time sent to us. So we have a whole lot of medicine that's in bottles already dispensed to patients that we can't at this point use. So that was where a lot of my questions about, is there any chance that we might get some pharmaceutical governing rules changed so that we could still use medicines that might not legally be able to be redispensed. So the question I had is for a patient with latent TB infection who's co-infected with HIV. He's on a triple, but I have this question for being on any of the other HIV meds. And if INH is not available for him, is it appropriate to use rifabutin for 4 months? Would that be a reasonable way to treat the LTBI? Or should we really work hard to get 9 months of INH?
Can I answer that, or would you like me to answer it?
Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
So we've had very similar experience. The problem is that, as you know, the Sestiva and the rifamycin definitely interact, and INH has much less interaction. So we always usually like to use INH in those cases. However, I think again, rifabutin for 4 months, if there was no way to get INH, would be an option. But again, I think you got to really be aware that you have to raise the dose of the rifabutin because of the interactions with the Sestiva. And, again, you'd have to look for any kind of, potential side effects. But, again, I really believe that it's all about prioritization. If you ask me, I think that this is the kind of case where, personally, we should be using, the 9-month regimen as a priority, just because of the lack of really good information, especially among our highest risk groups, which are HIV-infected individuals. But that's just my comment.
I agree completely, and again, it's a great question. Rifabutin has never been studied, given daily for 4 months for this indication. We do substitute rifabutin in our active TB treatment regimen, so definitely, that suggests that it would probably work or be fine, but we don't have the evidence-based data for it. And I just want to point out, too, that there isn't that much data for the use of rifampin for 4 months either. So it's not like it hasn't been studied as INH has.
But, I think, again, it all comes down to priority. These are the kind of cases I think should be our number one priority.
Absolutely.
And I think that if we do have INH, outside of active cases, are immunosuppressed individuals, who especially are on anti-RETs where there may be this interaction, in my opinion, should be a high priority.
Yep.
Do you agree, Deb?
I agree.
And Deb, how do you feel? Okay. I'm sorry about that. I think, operator, anybody else on the phone line?
Yes, we do have a question from the line of Farah Pervez. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Farah Parvez. So I was able to make the call. I just wanted to echo what was said earlier regarding corrections. I think this is a complicated decision. For New York City jails, we feel like we have enough supply for the next 3 to maybe 6 months, but sort of beyond that, we would also be scrambling. And, as we get more guidance on when drugs might be available, I think it will be very helpful to correctional facilities to figure out exactly what protocol changes to make, because, you're talking about training hundreds of staff and rewriting policies and protocols, and once you implement something, changing it or going back to something you were doing before can get very complicated. So, we've been reluctant to make major changes unless we feel like we need to. So I appreciate the call and sort of the ongoing, information that we've been receiving about the status of things.
Thank you very, very much for that comment. I agree with you. I do think, that we just because we're having the issue, we shouldn't just jump. But I will say, on the other hand, this is a great time, though, to look at, other alternatives. And it's not easy, you're right. But, in my opinion, if we're going to start these things, the key is to make sure we can complete them. And I think the time is right, especially in an environment like yours where you can actually look at it on a, let's say, a more, controlled basis to see what are the effects of switching to a, 3-month, 3 HP regimen to assure that we complete. And in that way, we may be able to save some INH, but you're right, it's not that simple. It's not something you just can automatically overnight switch. There's a lot of policies and retraining. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. All right, why don't we go to our last call, and then I want to thank you. Operator, one more call?
We do have a follow-up from Jackie Andula. Please go ahead.
My name is Yang Tato, and this question came up before. When the LTBI treatment, INH 5 months, for example, and switch to rifampin, do we have to do like a full course of rifampin, or can we shorten it?
Sundari, do you want to, since you dealt with that before, do you want to reiterate the point?
Right. there is no guideline for what to do in that situation, so it is sort of on a case-by-case basis, but there's no data to suggest that if you gave 5 months of INH that then you can shorten treatment with rifampin to less than 4 months. I mean, it makes sense, but there is no data to drive that. What I would do is really encourage you to call your state program for guidance, and also can turn to the experts that we have at the regional training and medical consultation centers like Dr. Ashkin to answer those sorts of questions. Again, it should be in a case-by-case basis and take into account some of the things we've already discussed, like whether the patient is immunocompromised, are they under 5. I mean, so definitely looking at certain aspects of the case that might help you make that decision.
Sundari, thank you very, very much. I think with that we're going to conclude today's presentation. I want to stop and tell you how much I really am indebted, and I can't thank everybody who participated today. I think this is a very difficult situation we're in, and I think that's one of the comments that were made over and over again is that we're in this together. But in order to make sure we know how best to treat our patients and how to deal with the situation, I think it becomes very important to be informed. And we hope today that you got the information that you could take home with you so that you know how to prepare, because I think our ultimate goal is our patients really do rely on us to make sure they're getting the best treatment. So I want to thank Sundari, I want to thank John, I want to thank Jasmine and Neha. I want to thank Christine for all of her, her information and joining us today, as well as Felicia and Phil and Coco for their participation, especially on such short notice.
Dave, can I mention one thing?
Please.
Is there going to be a way for us to answer all the questions that have been asked that that we weren't able to respond to?
That's what I was going to say, and thank you, Sundari. What you could do is, if you have continued questions, the first thing I would say is any specific questions you have, I urge you to go to your local TB programs or your state TB programs, because as you heard, it really changes from location to location, and they truly are the experts. If we could help out, any of the 5 centers have medical consultation lines to answer your questions. And if you want to ask any of the speakers a specific question, if you get on our webpage and email us, we'd be happy to refer the question to the speaker and then get an answer for you. We're also going to post some of the specifics that we had about some of the questions about the FDA that we'll try to get better answers, especially with expiration. But with that, I just want to thank you all for joining us today. Please do us a favor and complete the online survey, and that will be mailed to your email address. It really helps us to see how we can improve what we're doing. So with that, I really want to thank you for everything you do. I want to thank you for being our colleagues, and I want to thank you for, just as we said before, protecting our community and helping our nation be free of TB. So with that, thank you so much. Until the next time, you have a good day. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.